What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Culture FC, the weekly soccer show that's not really about soccer. We cover lifestyle, fashion, politics, all of the interesting things happening surrounding the beautiful game, just none of the things happening on the pitch. My name is Louie, and I am joined here by my two amazing co-hosts, Alan, Brendan. And this week, we got to talking about the Portland Timbers. I know this is our second Spotlight episode back-to-back, but after last week's episode on Seattle, we figured that we can't really talk about Seattle Sounders without talking about one of their biggest rivals, the Portland Timbers. We really wanted to highlight what makes the Timbers different from Seattle, but also what makes them so awesome in their own right. If we missed anything in this episode that you think we should have mentioned or talked about, please leave us a comment if you're watching the video version on YouTube or Facebook, or email us at contact@troubleware.com. That is TREBLWEAR.com. Please leave us a nice 5-star review on your favorite podcasting app if that is how you are listening to this podcast. And we do have an Instagram. Our Instagram is at culturef.c, where you will be able to find short clips from the podcast, insight, behind the scenes stuff that you don't get to listen to in the edited version of the podcast, and just cool stuff we'll be posting all the time. So please follow us there. And if you have a friend who loves soccer, family member who loves soccer, your dad, your sister, your brother, share this podcast with them. And I think that's it. And let's jump into this week's show.
Alright guys, so welcome back. Another episode. This week we're going to be talking about the Portland Timbers, just because last week we talked about Seattle Sounders, and what is Seattle Sounders without the Portland Timbers? And kind of without really joining them two together, because they hate each other's guts. We don't want to say that they go hand in hand, but their stories are somewhat similar, both being from that part of the country and kind of having similar cultures, not even just soccer-wise, but just as kind of geographically and kind of all of that. There are a lot of similarities and things that overlap between them, that which kind of lead to why people kind of bunch them up all the time. You always see all the videos of just like Seattle and Portland, blah blah blah, the rivalry, blah blah blah. But as much as they are similar, there are a lot of stark differences between them. And we'll kind of get into all that in today's episode, and when we kind of dive deeper into who the Portland Timbers really are. So in terms of support, Portland Timbers, I think, often gets overlooked just because of the restrictions that their stadium puts on them. They have a much smaller stadium than a lot of teams in the MLS do, and especially the Sounders, that have this massive stadium that fits whatever 40-something plus thousand people. 60,000 people. And the Timbers don't have that. I mean, their stadium fits, 23 max? So I think that in terms of that, I think the numbers get skewed, and people always say, oh, but Atlanta and these teams are breaking records. Well, the Timbers don't really have that, but I think what the policy that best fits them is quality over quantity. I think that if you've ever seen a Timbers game, you'll see how crazy their support is. They always sell out season ticket holders. It's 10,000 people that are waiting on the wait list for the season ticket holders
so
as well.
Yeah, they have 10,000 people waiting to be added to the season tickets, to get season tickets, which is crazy. And
I'm sure that they would probably, I think Portland as a city's population is about on par with Seattle, so I think that in terms of having the people there in Portland to support the club, if they had the stadium, they would be breaking the same records that a lot of these clubs would be breaking in today's modern age.
Well, what some people argue is that the Seattle metropolitan area has a lot more people living in it than Portland does, but because of the limiting factor on the stadium, what Portland says is that if we had a bigger stadium, we would have as many people going to our games as Seattle, despite the fact that Seattle's a bigger
Is that what I just said?
Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying they're both like 650-something thousand people that live in the general, like Seattle both and Portland both have around those figures of people.
Okay.
So I think that like Timbers don't get their credit in terms of
just because their stadium's small doesn't mean they have the fan base.
Right.
As evidenced by the fact that there's 10,000 people on a waiting list, which would bring them up to the 31,000 to 34,000 range of people who would be season ticket holders.
Right, and I think last week we were talking about the Green Bay Packers. you think about a stadium that only fits 20-something thousand people, 10,000 people on a wait list is crazy, because that's one of those things that you may not get
in your lifetime, exactly.
Because that's half of your stadium's capacity. That's ridiculous. So it goes to show that the fans are there. There's definitely support for the Portland Timbers in Portland.
And it's also important to note, too, that in a similar fashion to Seattle, Portland only has 2 big-time sports teams. Not to discount the Portland Thorns, they're new to the scene and everything, but Portland essentially had 2 teams for you to root for. I don't think they've ever really had a football team. They never really had a baseball team. I don't know about the history of those areas, but clearly they didn't stick around. And so, it's another one of those factors where it gives you something to root for. It gives you a team to latch onto. So that absence in the market did, in fact, help both Seattle and Portland. But just wanted to draw that similarity as well.
Yeah, for anyone that doesn't know, it's the Portland
Thorns FC women's soccer.
That's the women's team. The Trailblazers is the basketball team, and then obviously the Portland Timbers.
And if you don't know who they are, I don't know why you're listening to the podcast. So
maybe they want to learn about.
Maybe they want to learn. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Portland Timbers are the men's MLS soccer team in Portland, Oregon. Well, yeah. So Louis, kind of dive into the history of Portland for us and give us their lowdown briefly, so that we don't bore the listeners, but kind of just let them know what the history of the Timbers are.
Yeah, so if you listened to our episode last week, or I'm sure some of you may know, but the Portland Timbers is one of very few teams in the MLS that, like Seattle, actually has history. And we've talked about how important history is to clubs before on here, and you should understand how important history is for a club. And so they've been around Portland in one way, shape, or another since 1975. And in that first year, they went to the championship game. But unfortunately, they lost it. Not to, keep talking about that, but basically since that first year in Nassau, they became known as Soccer City USA because it was an instant hit, similar to how it was in Seattle. But Portland became known as Soccer City and not Seattle. So it's that cool thing where, despite the fact that they came into the league at the same time, they kind of came into existence at the same time. Portland Timbers is known as Soccer City, and I still think it's relatively true today. Yeah. And
just to note, the first championship game was known as the Soccer Bowl, which I think should come back. I think
Soccer Bowl, huh?
Let's Americanize it, man. Yeah. The Soccer Bowl.
So the Nassau that exists.
Is it still doing that?
Exists. Yeah, they call their championship game the Soccer Bowl.
Ugh. Oh, I love it.
Yeah,
I think it's sweet.
I think that's sweet.
I think it's cool. Better than the MLS Cup.
Yeah.
That sounds so European. Call it the Soccer Bowl.
Yeah, make it American, man.
Yeah.
And so since that initial almost championship season in that first year of their existence, they were well supported. Unfortunately, they didn't win much afterwards, but they were well supported. People in Portland love them. They just started to get ingrained in that local culture, right? And then, unfortunately, the team folded in 1982 as the players' salaries started to outpace team revenue. Mm-hmm. And so they weren't making as much, so they couldn't necessarily pay their players all that much. So, unfortunately, they folded. And then the league soon thereafter followed them and folded as well. I don't think soccer was ready at the time. And then in 1985, a new team called FC Portland was established. And then in 1987, a local businessman named Art Dixon bought the team and renamed it to the Portland Timbers. They only existed as FC Portland for 2 years, and rightly so. I'm so happy this guy changed it back. And he was a longtime Timbers fan. He had been a season ticket holder from 1979 until the year that the team folded. And so when he bought it, he was like, "No, we gotta put the name back, because for me and for us as a fan group, this is super important that we keep it very Portland, very traditional," and brought the name back. And so he then injected some money and started to make it more professional as a team. And then, unfortunately, that team also folded in 1990 just because no soccer was really going on in the 80s and 90s.
They weren't ready for it yet.
A reoccurring theme
in the U.S.
That won't happen again.
Yeah, it might still. But hopefully not to the Timbers, of course. But so then a new team is founded in 2001, and they are also named the Portland Timbers. Thank God that continued, and they are playing in various different leagues in the second tier of the American soccer pyramid. And then that lasted up until 2010, when they then entered the MLS, and they went on and actually ended up winning the MLS Cup in 2015. And yeah, that has been a little bit of their history from start to finish. Of course, we glossed over a lot of it because I was trying to give you guys a quick lowdown. But one cool thing is they've played in Providence Park which is their stadium now, since the very beginning. Like
I did not know
they've
that.
been playing in that stadium since the day they were
That's
founded,
cool.
which is cool.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that there are always like there are these breaks in between their existence.
And that leads to the question, do you think they'll ever expand? Do you think?
So I think they should expand, but I think the issue is that where Providence Park is, it's right downtown.
Yeah.
It's legitimately downtown Portland, and they're very limited into what they can build.
Yeah.
In terms of, I actually saw a little video about it a little while back, and I wish I watched it again before the start of this podcast. But essentially, the issue is that they can only really build up, but building up requires them to put more support, and then the support starts going onto the sidewalk, and it starts to really take away from the area in a weird way. So they have a little bit of a weird fight to try and figure out how to make the stadium.
It'd be hard too if they are in the middle of downtown Portland. I mean, you don't have space. You don't have space, unfortunately. But
they do have a plan to, I think, get 4,000 more seats by 2019.
Yeah.
Which,
but again,
it doesn't seem like a lot in terms of like how many people support them, but
considering where it is, how tough it probably is.
Considering all the issues that they have with building it, 4,000 is going to add a lot more to that park.
Yeah,
which is really cool.
And the building plans, just the graphics make it look pretty sweet.
So we'll make sure we put those notes in the show notes as well, so you guys take a look at that. But on to the idea of like heritage and where they've kind of been the whole time. I think there's a bunch of things that I love about Portland Timbers. There's not only a name, but also like their team identity. The Timbers is a phenomenal name. I'm usually very anti-American naming standards on teams because I hate the idea of like a team that has nothing to do with from where they're from, because a team should be connected to local culture.
Yeah.
And so for when you have like the Utah Jazz, which of course they started in New Orleans, so it made sense in New Orleans, then moved to Utah.
Yeah.
But like Utah's not known for jazz.
Yeah.
There's no lakes in Los Angeles. So it's like, I get it. They were from it was Minneapolis Lakers, and they moved. I don't care. I just don't like the fact that a team name has nothing to do with local culture.
Yeah.
So when you have the Portland Timbers, which are in direct connection with the area's history of lumbering, it's really, really cool. And on top of it, there's a big axe in their crest, which I find so
badass.
sick. It's badass. They're like, it's badass if you can put a weapon as your crest. Like that to me is awesome.
They have hit the nail on the head for the perfect.
They have hit the axe in the tree.
They have felled the log perfectly.
And on top of it, they also have these like chevrons in their logo, which symbolizes a tree. So it's just overall, I think that their crest is amazing. They've actually they've changed very
along with the coloring of their stuff too. I think that it's very fitting with what you would think of Portland,
Pacific Northwest.
Right. And on top of it, they have changed their logo very minimally throughout these different existences. So when they entered the MLS, they updated their logo a tiny bit, but the general everything stayed the same. It's a circle with an axe, and it says Portland Timbers. And so I love that. To me, that just shows that it's ingrained in the local culture. It's for the people, and it really, really represents an area of America that just loves soccer. It's iconic in what it is.
And in terms of kind of soccer rivalries and who the Timbers' biggest rivals are, Sounders, which we've sort of touched on, but also Vancouver Whitecaps are two of their bigger rivals, and we talked about this in the last episode more, so we're not going to get too deep into it, but they play in the Cascadia Cup and this kind of 3-team tournament that's run by the fans and kept pretty local and fan run. So if you want to listen to that, go listen to the other episode that we had on the Seattle Sounders, which we get more in depth, and we don't really want to bore you guys to death, anyone who has already listened to that, with the details. So we're going to move on now to just talking about kind of Portland as a city, and I think this is one area where there is a lot of overlap between Portland and Seattle. And for anyone that listened to last week, and if you haven't, we touch upon this idea of counterculture and how Seattle was able to grow soccer because they are very counterculture. So they don't want to do what's mainstream in the U.S. and they don't want to be the American football culture. They don't want to play the basketball, whatever it may be. Portland is very much like that as well. I think that,
if not more so.
Yeah.
And if all I can think of when I hear Portland is Portlandia, it's just the most satirical comedy show about people of Portland.
Yeah.
And it just hits the nail on the head as to like how crazily out there and just counterculture they are. So that even more so pins, it's like, oh, it's soccer. Like that's such a Portland thing.
Yeah. I haven't watched that, so can you just explain that to like
It's
someone who
pretty
watched?
much, it's like a sketch comedy show where like they're almost like vignettes, but within the episode there's like a couple different stories that go on, and it's Fred Armisen, and I forget the woman's name. Man, it's drawn a blank. But either way, they just do these really satirical, just over the top, like typical, like what happens in Portland.
Yeah.
One of the things I can really remember is that Fred Armisen, like, they dress as two women who are like running a bookstore or something like that, and it's just, they're just so over the top and funny, and I recommend watching it if you want like a good kind of
on Netflix, or where do I find that?
I believe it's on Netflix. Yeah. But it's super funny. I've always been a fan of Fred Armisen because it's SNL and everything.
We were joking about how the Seattle reminds us of the whole hipster scene, but I think Portland even more so, because when I think hipster, I think curly mustache and a flannel, and that's just like
a pretend lumberjack.
Yeah, pretend lumberjack, where they are real lumberjacks, but you can see it. They're growing out the beards and all that. So
Carrie Brownstein,
Portlandia, Netflix, check it out.
I think so. Yeah.
Portlandia, if you'd like to sponsor this podcast,
we would take a nice break here for you.
But yeah, I think that the counterculture idea, like you said, I actually almost identify Portland more as the counterculture city versus Seattle. And so it does make a lot of sense that Portland would be Soccer City USA, because soccer, like we said last week, is such an anti-American sport that for them, they were kind of like, no, this makes sense.
Yeah.
The rest of the country's obsessed with baseball and football. We'll be obsessed with soccer.
Yeah.
And, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
And so, like we said with Seattle, all of those things are great as to why a city would embrace it. But at the same time, what sets Portland apart as a soccer team is their fan culture. And like we touched upon in the rivalry, rivalry is really great in building fan culture, which you should definitely check out some of the tifos that the Timbers Army do. But we want to veer this conversation more towards what sets them apart from other teams that are usually locked in the same group,
right.
Seattle and Vancouver. And so one of the biggest things is they created an organic fan culture. Of course, Seattle did too, but just what makes Portland so different is, first of all, their mascot is a human being, which I'm pretty sure is like the first existence of a like human being mascot in a professional team. And so they had a mascot called Timber Jim. Who was a legitimate lumberjack who was a Portland Timbers fan back in the 70s. And so after watching a couple games, he fell in love with it and was just like, you know what? I'm going to reach out to the team owners. And he calls them up and says, hey, I want to bring my chainsaw to the game, and I want to be our mascot. And they said, oh, no way in hell. We're not doing that.
Astonishing question.
Which, it must have been the best conversation that's ever happened, and I wish I could have listened to it. But he then ends up, I forget how, but he ends up becoming their mascot. And he used to have this big pole that he would climb up, and he would stand up there until they scored a goal. And he had, in an interview he said that he was up there for a couple games before they scored. Yeah. And then he would basically zip down it and then start just doing crazy shit, just going wild. And then every time they score, he would saw off the end of a log and they give it to the player who scored, which is a tradition that they still have going on today.
That's fly.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other team off the top of my head that does something like that. So, I mean, I know there's always the game ball for the guy who gets the hat trick, but I think that's just so Portland.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the man of the match is usually one person, whereas this, they're like, all right, you scored, we're going to honor you with a piece of wood. And so a lot of the players actually end up signing that piece of log and donating it to any charitable cause that the Timbers Army is involved in.
That's cool.
But then Timber Jim retires, right? And then, a lot of places might be like, oh, okay, whatever, we're getting more into the mainstream, let's kind of stop that business. No, thank God Portland went and was like, no, we're going to add another Timber guy. And it became, I think Timber Joey is his name. And now he does all of the sawing and all of that for the sawing. He's the one who took over for Timber Jim and now does it at every single game. But one thing I actually just skipped over is that, so Timber Jim's daughter died a few years back, and I think this was after he had already retired.
Yeah, in a car accident.
But the entirety of the Timbers Army, he had asked the Timbers Army to sing "You Are My Sunshine," and at the 80th minute of one of the games, they sang "You Are My Sunshine," and this dude like bawled like a baby because it meant
Getting
so much to
goosebumps
him.
now.
Yeah. And then now at the 80th minute of every single home game, the Timbers Army sing "You Are My Sunshine" as a group.
Wow.
Which, like,
tear jerking.
Those are the kind of things that can only happen if you build a community that actually cares about each other. You know what I mean?
And if you think in terms of kind of some of the, when I heard this story, it triggered the memory of going to a Red Sox game and kind of how the Red Sox, you have that 7th inning stretch. They're singing "Sweet Caroline," and Boston is seen as the best ballpark in the country to go to kind of enjoy a game, one of the most historic, most iconic. And obviously the meanings behind these moments to sing are completely different, but it's these little things that kind of make it such an experience and more authentic and create a connection between fan and club.
It's like iconic.
Right.
If if I hear "Sweet Caroline" anywhere, I'm going to sing it.
Yeah.
It just becomes this thing, and it attaches you to that location.
Right. And even more so, how many people do you know that might have gone to visit Fenway and you've seen them post a Snapchat or post something on social media of just that, nothing about the game and just that moment of kind of singing "Sweet Caroline" during the 7th inning? That's what builds these kind of special moments for people, and creates fond memories. And eventually down the line, I think it will lose some of that meaning just because people will not know. Like right now, I don't know why people sing "Sweet Caroline" in the 7th inning of the Red Sox game.
But they do.
Right, but they do, and it creates it. Absolutely. And it's something super differentiating because I don't think any club in the MLS, let alone anywhere in the world, has something like that. There might be a handful of clubs.
Also, you have like Liverpool with "You Never Walk Alone," and you have other teams that do it. But at each instance that a fan group adopts a song, it becomes iconic, like you said. Absolutely. Maybe not for the same reasons, but just because it happens during the game. And those are the kind of things that, like I keep saying, using the word iconic, but that's just what you think about. Those are the things that stand out to you when you are experiencing fan culture.
Yeah, and when you think of like world-class fan culture, that's kind of one of the
up there.
It's song, it's the tifos that Portland already kind of creates. It's these different elements that I think that we need to go over. Is the Timbers Army, which is the Portland Timbers fan group that was established 2001, I think. They wanted to create a fan group that was supporting the Timbers with this European sort of mindset as its foundation. They wanted to bring the flares, the drums, the music, all of that. They wanted to bring that culture to the Portland Timbers before even the Portland Timbers were in MLS. They wanted to do this
for a USL team.
Right. So when you're creating a
imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to a USL team and they're just like crazy.
So to put this in perspective for anybody listening, if you have a Division II basketball team in your area, just imagine the support for that team just being absurd because of a group of people who decided that instead of, supporting something on TV, they decided they wanted to support their local team.
And no, be very active.
Yeah,
extremely active.
Not just go to that D2 game. Go there and be a presence, be a voice for the team to support them. And so that has all built something really amazing in Portland. I think that when I think of Portland, I think of one of the more intimidating places to play in the MLS.
Yeah,
without a doubt.
It's because crazy atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean because it's one of those things where it's the number. You don't need the numbers.
No,
you just need the people to be there. Intense, just kind of putting that pressure on. And I don't know if there are many other places in the MLS that have that same intensity. And what I really like about the Timbers that differentiate them a lot from what I've seen with the Sounders is that they are way more raw and kind of more aggressive in there. They still have that great element of keeping unity between their fan bases. So the LGBTs, every type of diverse culture is definitely a part of the Timbers fan base. But they definitely have that more European hardcore kind of raw feeling to them of the tifos that are kind of a little more intense. The songs that they sing about Seattle are a little more PG-13. They're not the regular kind of nice songs that you would hear.
The nice MLS go.
Right.
We gotta go.
Right. So they have. I mean, their fan base seems like they're a lot more raw. I don't want to keep repeating the same word, but raw is like what I would think of, and more passionate in a sense.
It's a testament to them. They were actually featured on Sports Illustrated before the Timbers even hit the MLS for all of these things we just mentioned. They were creating so much fervor in Portland that National Geographic,
National Geographic.
Nat Geo.
Sports Illustrated actually ran a story talking about how awesome their fans were, and they were getting, media attention on a club that was a second division soccer team.
Yeah.
So not only is it like the sport that everybody makes fun of, but it's also a second division club in a sport that everyone makes fun of. So it's like really low down the totem pole that you would imagine. But the Timbers Army were the ones who were really creating that atmosphere that was giving them national attention.
Yeah.
For you to be able to be featured on, a national magazine about sports that's actually, I'm going to say an international magazine about sports in a country that is obsessed with football and basketball, and for you to be like featured as like a full-on like story in Sports Illustrated, that's absurd.
Yeah.
And this is a year before. This is like a year and a half before they ever joined the MLS. And so,
not to mention a game that they lost.
That's true. They
lost the game,
but and they were still featured because of this amazing fan support.
Yeah.
It was like the tifos, and it was just the image of what the Portland fans were doing at the time that literally got them international attention.
Yeah, and I mean the attention was so much, and that their kind of political power was so strong that they were actually credited for bringing the expansion team that the MLS was giving out to Portland. And when you think about it, that's amazing.
It's that similar thing we're talking about, like the Seattle supporters groups, where they were given a voice. They were given this ability of ownership of their club, and that helped bring the MLS to Portland.
Absolutely. Yeah. Portland does so well now are these tifos that we kind of have been speaking of, but I mean, some of their stuff is just so creative. I mean, it really shows how passionate they are for the club.
So if you're just tuned in now, a tifo is a organized demonstration of love for your club. Usually it manifests in big ass banners.
Yeah.
That are.
It's an Italian word, so you can impress your lady and or guy friends.
Yeah.
But basically, what the Timbers Army does is they'll get together in these warehouses and they will just paint amazing cultural references or some big artwork, or every single one is different, unique, intimidating, funny. It just depends on the mood, and you get the Timbers Army to show up and everybody paints it and they store it in a warehouse, and then before every game they put them up. They're huge. They cover entire stands. They're probably huge, probably like 100 and something feet by another 100 and something feet,
and they're not just like these square like portraits. The one that sticks out to me the most is they did Freddy Krueger. Like before a game, he pops
legends
up
never sleep.
Behind him is kind of like this scary backdrop, and it's amazing what they're able to do, and it reminds me of the Dortmunds of the world that produce these high quality art tifos. That you go into a stadium and you see that your fans have done this for you. It builds such an amazing connection between.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean.
And even just the viewers at home too. It's like wow, like there are people there who like are willing to stand up and like do this and hold their whatever they have to hold for that long.
Yeah,
it's like I want to follow the Portland Timbers.
Yeah. And so to put it in perspective, there's a lot of English clubs that don't do this because they can't. I don't think
any English clubs now do this anymore. Like top
you might have sections that have banners. You might have sections that sing. But it's no one. I don't know if they're allowed actually. So I don't want to dive too deep into they're better than English clubs. But it's like, but even outside of England,
very few clubs in the world. Yeah, I think that's why Dortmund is so well appreciated because they are still doing this stuff. And I think I saw PSG did one versus when they were playing a game versus Monaco. But it's an art form that's being lost, unfortunately. And it's great to see that. There are clubs in the MLS that are doing this still.
Right. And so Portland, the Timbers Army just does an amazing job with the tifos, and every single one is just absurd or interesting in some way, shape, or form. Either it's intimidating, like we said, or it's funny, interesting, whatever it is. But it's such an effort too, because
they had a Bob Ross one, dude. Like, just like if you guys have time, just like Google Portland Timbers tifos and like just have a day.
Yeah,
they are incredible to see. And if you think about it, these are on TV. You might look at it real quick and be like, oh, that's really cool. But then you don't consider how much time and effort goes into, first of all, designing this, and then transferring that onto a big piece of canvas, which you're gonna have to have people paint. And so they go through hundreds and hundreds of gallons of paint. Which is crazy.
Yeah.
It's something that they undertake as literally as an army.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how else to describe it. It's literally as an army to get it done.
And it's interesting because when they go to the stadiums, the club allows them to do it, but the club doesn't actually really give them the hands-on help. So it really is fans doing this and setting things up. And if you watch some videos on it, you'll see fans are the ones on the field directing when these things are going up, directing when they're coming down, taking them underneath the stadium to put them away, etc. So where we saw in Seattle, the fans had a voice kind of in the boardroom in more kind of corporate settings. I don't want to say corporate, but you know what I mean. The fans here seem to have more power through their voice in the stands, and kind of that's where they're getting a lot of their connection with the players.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point to make. And one thing that's really interesting about the Timbers Army is that it started off as one section of fans, and it kind of just kept growing out of control, right? They kept growing, and now they have a bunch of different subgroups. So now you have, basically the Timbers Army then became this like big umbrella that all of these other subgroups are in. Basically, like you mentioned before, they're very, LGBT supportive and positive on that, and they have their own subgroup. And other parts of Portland, anything that you can even think of as a subgroup, they have. And they also have different sectional subgroups in terms of geography. So you have, fans. There's actually one from Boston. It's like the Boston supporters of Portland Timbers. And so,
cool.
It's all across the U.S. It's all across the world. There's one like in Italy. They were like Portland Timbers supporters. And basically, it's a membership. You become a part of this thing that you're now like a part of, And so the best thing that the Timbers Army did is they actually established an independent supporters trust. And it's called the 107 Independent Supporters Trust, or you're now a 107ist. In other words, like that's what they call you when you join. But basically, you join it because they use it to plan tifos, bus trips to away matches, and all the charitable work that they do.
Yeah.
And so, because they do a lot of nonprofit work, and for them, they were like, we are a community-based group, and we want to help support the community.
Yeah.
So they are always helping nonprofits, the ones who love soccer, the ones who don't, they just love to help their community. And so they give back to Portland area and all of that.
I think that the point you brought up about right now, just of them organizing trips to go to away games, is super important, because I in looking into them more, they are very much believers in the away support, almost like it is in Europe. Again, another European idea, and it's something that is not common in American sports, in any sport, really.
Especially because it's such a big country. That
right. It is hard. It is hard to travel, but you go to a home game for a team, you're really just going to see fans, and then kind of those random fans that are dressed. So when you hear about a team that's putting in an effort really to get fans to travel to whatever teams it is, that's intimidating. That's really scary. I mean, they want to be the loudest ones in the stadiums. They want to go to the Revs, play the Revs, and be the loudest ones in the stadiums. And that's something that we don't see anywhere else in the U.S. in terms of, you have really good home support for a lot of these fans, but you don't see these fans leaving and or organizing trips really to get mass groups of people.
Right.
I mean, they fill out their away sections when they go. You know what I mean? So I think that's something super cool, and I hope that other teams try to emulate that more, because it is something that when you see in European games or games abroad, the away fans really matter. And if they can shut up the home crowd, it really gives your team an advantage.
Oh yeah.
And there have been instances when they've played Seattle and they've gone up to Seattle, because it's only a couple hours drive, that they have 3,000 people in the stadium, but they make it sound like they have 10,000, just based on how much they support the Timbers.